Today is Wednesday, the 15th of September, and this is the study session of the City Council. May I have roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Miller,
Present.
Councilmember Ramos Amit. She is absent. Councilmember Ortiz,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Furman,
Present.
and Mayor Holmes.
Present. All righty. Mayor Pro Tem Furman, how about you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Absolutely. I say want to stand and place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay. Specific to tonight's study session, this is time for public comment. This is the time set aside for public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have any general public comment at this point in time? There will be another opportunity later in the evening for regular session, but Savdi, do we have any general public comments?
Mayor, I believe I do have one person in Zoom.
Okay.
Peggy raised her hand, so I will, Peggy, if you can hear me, you have 3 minutes to speak on the current, for public comments.
Oh, hi. I just read that we're going to have another time to discuss what's on the agenda. And my question has to do with that, with one of the topics on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. We'll resume at 5 o'clock for
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Okay,
I don't have any other further comments, Mayor.
all right. So item number 4, study session items. Item 4A, a city council study session for discussion on possible direction on the following short-term rental ordinance. Do we have any public comments?
No comments on Zoom, Mayor.
What about in person?
None in person.
You need to fill out, you got to do the fill out kind of thing. I will invite then Mr. Tim Ellis to come forward. But I will need you to fill out one of these forms, Tim, please, on your way out.
Happy to fill out the form. I did fill it out online, but
Okay.
thank you for this opportunity. I know, I think all of you. And thank you for welcoming me. I'm a 20-year resident of Indio, passionate about the city, passionate about tourism. And I have submitted my comments online. They're in your packet for you to review wherever you need to. First of all, I might say I'm a huge supporter of STRs, or in the industry now, we call them STVRs. We love to change the acronyms around a little bit. I understand that potentially there's $3 million coming into Indio on TOT. And for those listening at home, that is a significant amount of money because it comes directly to the city and it's not shared by the county or the state. And that can go towards the general fund and go towards policing and fire and ambulance and first responders. So it is significant and we need to protect that. We really do. What this amendment does is address the bad behavior of a few, which is really, really good. I think there needs to be a very hefty sign-up fee for people that have SDVRs, so that can fund whether it's the police chief or whether it's this gentleman behind me, to manage the bad behavior. Fines need to be hefty, and we need to implement a good strategy on dealing with that. And I've outlaid that on my recommendations. I've also addressed the 10 p.m. curfew, and they there's kind of a disconnect between the 10 p.m. and the noise over the boundaries. And I don't want there to be any confusion, because this town is a town of first responders and a town of workers. And you and I go to bed at 10 o'clock. So the 10 p.m. works for us. Somebody coming off their shift that works for IPD or the fire department, their 10 p.m. is often 10 a.m. They want to go to sleep at 10 a.m. So we've got to protect those people as well. I've also made a recommendation that is not in your packet, which is limiting it to 32 stays a year. Palm Springs did that very successfully. I'm going to have to obviously cut it off because I respect
That's okay.
you.
We'll let it go for just a few seconds longer.
Okay,
but go
just
right ahead.
wave when you want,
Okay.
when you've had enough of me. I get it. And the way the 36 stays is good is because the owners of these STVRs are smart people. They're in it for the money. And if you limit the amount of stays, they tend to push the revenue into high revenue areas, October through May. And they steer away from the summer business, which is low rated, which attracts the college crowd and the whoop-de-doo, let's have fun and get the keg open, which I think we all want to avoid. So I would really take a look at that. In that, the trash cans, I think, and it's a minor thing, but from a code enforcement or policing standpoint, it's better to have rules. You put them out this time, you take them out at this time, and if you don't, then you're in trouble. Item B on page 16, the wording is very, very loosey-goosey, and from a legal standpoint, and I don't pretend to be a lawyer, I think it needs to be very, very clear what you're doing. And on the noise ordinance, I know you plucked it from the 95C municipal code, and it talks about the electronic noise. But what's also really important is the people noise, because people jumping into pools are screaming and shouting, and that's as much important. So I would encourage you to add that to the ordinance as well. I think staff did an excellent job with this, and I congratulate you, and I congratulate the city council and caring about the people in our neighborhoods. I think we can live alongside each other very nicely. But the way we're headed is not a good way. And if you look at what happened in Cathedral City and Rancho Mirage and Palm Desert, they have thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and they've lost their good income. You need that good income. You need that 3 million, and it's going to grow because they're going to come here even more. So let's do it right. Let's get it right. And I'm getting the signal from the mayor. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I'm available for questions if anyone has.
A little bit of background. Okay, so it's red, not green. A little bit of background on Tim. I first knew him at the CVB, and his, not only is he an Indio resident married to a sheriff, but he has wide-reaching knowledge in the greater Palm Springs area, city of Palm Springs, and some of the other cities, because he's been actively involved. And I thought that his perspective would be helpful for all of us to hear as we go through this process and make our decisions. So thank you very much. And I will now defer to council to see what comments you might have in terms of our short-term rental ordinance. City attorney.
Madam Mayor,
jump in
we
there
actually,
before that.
Jason and I actually have a PowerPoint of
Okay.
Roxanne Diaz, city attorney.
No, go ahead.
And Jason Anderson.
Hi, I'm Jason Anderson, Code Enforcement Manager, and thank you for having us back.
Love it.
Madam Mayor, I understand there is one more public comment. So
Oh, there is
we'll
terrific.
let, I think it's on Zoom.
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Mayor. Yes, we have Davis, Mayor, on Zoom.
Okay.
You have 3 minutes to speak.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council, for your time in considering this important topic. I'm Davis Meyer, Director of Partnership for Visit Greater Palm Springs. formerly the Greater Palm Springs CVB. Vacation rentals are an important part of our region's economy, and we could not support festivals and events like Coachella and Stagecoach with just the limited number of hotel rooms that we have in the Valley. So we applaud the steps that you're taking to focus on regulation and enforcement that protects residents and creates a sustainable environment for short-term vacation rentals to continue to be available to visitors. As you may be aware, the City of Indio now collects the 1% GPS TBID assessment on behalf of Visit Greater Palm Springs, along with the TOT from short-term vacation rentals. The platform Airbnb does not include this assessment currently in the amount that it remits to the city each month. So those operators who book through Airbnb have to remit this 1% assessment to the city separately. As you're going through these ordinance changes to include language that requires the platforms to collect TOT, we would ask that you also look at including the collection of the GPS TBID in that requirement to help make things less confusing and more streamlined for short-term vacation rental operators, as well as the city finance staff, who have been incredible to work with, by the way. And Visit Greater Palm Springs is also currently working on 2 research studies on short-term vacation rentals. One that looks at the economic impact of short-term vacation rentals, not just in the region, but also at the city level, as well as a separate study that looks at the effects of vacation rental bans in other similar resort destinations. So we will be sharing those studies with the city when they are completed in the next few months. And I just thank you again for your time today and thoughtful consideration of your ordinance.
Thank you.
And that is it for comments, Mayor.
Okay, Jason.
Once again, thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council members. This is really going to be a continuation of our discussion last October, and you're going to see a lot of the same trends in this proposed ordinance. So let's get this kicked off.
Yeah.
Perfect. And just a quick agenda. We're going to talk about some of our current challenges. We're going to talk about some features of the updated ordinance, and there's some policy discussion. I can't see this again. Policy topics we want to cover and get some feedback from the City Council. So. Perfect. What are our current challenges? Our current ordinance doesn't adequately address neighborhood impacts, and I'm sure you've all received community feedback, rolled out parties, just general disorder from short-term rentals. Some of our other challenges are we're not able to identify true operators of short-term rentals. We don't know who the guests are. We don't know who the renters are. So there's a lot of people coming into the community operating these short-term rentals, and we really don't know who they are. We have challenges collecting TOT outside the Airbnb platform. As you know, we have the agreement with Airbnb to collect TOT on their transactions, but they're only a percentage of the total transactions that take place. There's lots of transactions that take place on, I think there's like 36 other platforms that offer rentals online. And we're starting to see a trend of short-term rentals, long-term rentals, and ADUs on the same property. I know one example where there's a ADU, a junior ADU on the property, and the house itself is a short-term rental. So on a weekend, you could have 2 families and 16 or 17 people in the short-term rental, all perfectly legal under the current ordinance. So we're gonna talk about that as well. And excuse me, I'm gonna take my mask off.
Please.
So the goals of our proposed ordinance, it's number 1, to reduce neighborhood impacts. We want to protect the consumers. We want to provide and ensure the operators provide a safe environment for people to come and enjoy our city, and also increase the accountability of the operators. They got to pay their TOT taxes. They got to be good neighbors. All in the effort to regulate the industry. We also want to look at ways to modernize our permit process. Right now, that is a significant barrier for compliance. It's all paper-based. So if you come and get a permit, The permit is done on a piece of paper, you turn it in, you pay via check, but we want to modernize the entire process. So the consumer, the end product, the operator, easy to comply, easy to obtain the permit, modern platform, you do it online, you pay your taxes online, all to make it more seamless for the city and for the operators. And I think we're going to jump into the application process. And Roxanne, you want to talk about this?
Yeah.
So this is sort of our ideal of what the application of a short-term rental could be. It's not what it is, what it could be. And this, our intent is have this automated so it's easy. I use the analogy, you should be able to do all your transactions on your phone. So you want to talk about it?
So just like the last time, Jason and I are going to tag team, so he'll jump in if I've missed something or wants to add anything. And so what we have here is kind of a flow chart that we put together in terms of submitting the application, the inspection, staff review, and then approval or denial. And we're going to kind of just hit the high points with respect to each one. How do I do that? Okay. Apparently I'm mouse challenged. So the application process, the one change that we've made here is that it is the property owner, not their agent, who must submit the application. And that really is, we do have some corporate ownerships. And so we want to make sure that we know who the property owner is and therefore requiring them to submit the application. Along with that, there will be a letter that's required if they're in an area that is in an HOA that the STRs are not prohibited. And if they are in an area that's just covered by CC&Rs, then a copy of the CC&Rs as well to verify that issue. And then third, this is new, is requiring a parking plan for vehicles of the renters. And a little bit later on, I'll explain how the parking plan works. And then last, even though historically and what we have been doing is inspecting the properties once we get an application for new permit, that's always been done. But we just want to include as part of the application process, the consent to inspect. And so the next step in the process for getting a permit is the inspection itself, which we have continually done and have been doing for some time. This is a building, fire, health, and safety inspection, very similar to current practices. What we're going to do is put together essentially inspection sheets. And so it'll make it very easy for our building officials to go out and inspect. It makes it clear for the renter in terms of what gets inspected. And so in terms of making sure that all the necessary life safety matters are taken care of, like your fire alarm, I guess carbon dioxide, things of that sort, making sure that things are working, that the place is habitable as well. And so for new permits, there will be required an inspection by one of our building folks. And then thereafter, for the same permittee and for the same permit, then you can self-certify using these forms signed under penalty of perjury with respect to that, those inspections. And so it makes it very transparent and clear to everybody in terms of what we are looking at. And every 5 years, there will be a new inspection. So that is, something that we discussed as a group in terms of trying to balance not the cost, but also the intrusion as well. And then I know a number of cities in our area, I know Palm Springs does self-inspections at some point in time. And so we wanted to address that as well. And then certainly if there are corrections that are required from the inspection, then there's a time frame in the ordinance for those corrections to be made. And so the inspection occurs from the staff perspective 15 days after the application is submitted. And then there's 30-day correction period. Jason, did you want to add anything?
Just to add to that, this is the self-certify, the letting people know what the rules are ahead of time. What we're going to be inspecting for is new. It's similar to what Palm Springs does. So there's no surprises. There's no surprise when a building inspector goes out and finds that your smoke detector doesn't work. So you'll know ahead of time, the 56 things that we're going to look for, and we're going to go down the list. And if nothing stands out, you can, get your permit right away. So something new. We think it's very important because on the field, what we see is after you get that initial permit, oftentimes there's modifications done that we don't correct or we don't know about. So this is just an intent to ensure that properties continue to be safe after that initial building inspection. Yes.
For the inspection every 5 years, is that inspection by the city or the self-inspection?
The city.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it'll be self-certified year 2, 3, and 4, inspected by a building inspector, and then go back into the self-certified pattern.
But anytime the property changed ownership,
Mhm.
or if which changes ownership and that new owner desires to have a permit for short-term rentals, that permit doesn't run with the land. It runs, per the permittee. And so an inspection would be required if there's an ownership change, let's say in year 3, for example.
So I'm also looking at the application, and the letter from the HOA and STR are not prohibited. But I asked this before on building, and you told me that wasn't applicable, that we could stop a permittee from coming in and getting a building permit for something that wasn't authorized by their HOA because we didn't have the authority. So what gives us the authority to ask for their HOA on a STR here when we can't do it when it's building?
So at the end of the day, with respect to our building codes and our zoning codes, those trump any type of CC&Rs or architectural review with respect to the HOA. And so if there was, let's say the HOA said, the HOA had a architectural item that indicated that their garage can be no more than 20 feet. However, our code provides that the garage can be up to 22 feet. Then it's a ministerial permit. It's a building permit. By law, we were required to provide it, even though there's a discrepancy between the two, 22 feet versus 20. And then it would be up to the homeowners association board to essentially effectuate their CC&Rs. With the transition to short-term rentals, I know I've taken that position before. I think that, after talking to staff and speaking to others, and trying to look at it in a different way, in the sense that we're drafting the rules. It's not as if it's a building code type issue where by law we're required to provide the permit. This is regulatory. I think that with enough conversation, including yours as well, that when we did the rewrite, that it was important to acknowledge the HOA issue. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a question with respect to the inspection process. As you mentioned, right after the inspection, someone's going to make modifications. But I'm more concerned if there's a point at which there's complaints lodged. Clearly, there's 17 people in a 2-bedroom house or something. Is there room in this process here to be able to say, granted, it's every 5 years, unless there are a certain number of complaints that lead us to believe that there has been a modification?
There is.
Okay.
There is. We left ourselves the ability to inspect at any time.
Okay. Thank you.
And then if there are no questions, just moving through the process, then we'll have staff review after the inspection occurs, corrections are made, and that's, pretty standard. And, what we're looking at is there anything within the list of grounds for denial that the permit should be denied? So the property doesn't meet the minimum, safety standards, there's delinquent TOT, we've built in a permit suspension. If a permit has been suspended or revoked within the last 12 months, and there's a whole brand new list actually in the ordinance that provides a more definitive list, and not that we didn't have it before, but we did, but provides a little bit more robust list with respect to denial of a permit, including failure to pay any previous fines, demonstrating, failing to demonstrate their ability to conform to the operational requirements, not complying with all of the codes and failure to provide a complete application. If we find out that the application is false and misleading, or there's false information provided. So we go through that grounds for denial. There also will be grounds for any revocation or suspension in the future should that happen. And if we can't check the box on any of those, then the permit gets issued. And so the city also, this is new, we can impose additional conditions if it's warranted for that particular property. And so it provides us the ability to be flexible or I guess not reactive, but to address certain things. And we don't know what those are. But if there's a condition that needs to be added, certainly it needs to comport to what the issue is. It can't just be any condition. So we included that as well. And then the next, there we go. The next is then the permit gets issued. Permit will be valid for 12 months. And something new that we built in here is that once the permit is issued, then we provide notice to the neighbors within 500 feet. So that way the neighbors know that they have an STR that's nearby, and it takes away this cloud of unknowing, uncertainty, and so it's made very clear to the neighbors there's an STR. And so that is part of the application process. The permit needs to be renewed annually. It has to be renewed 60 days before expiration. And there's going to be a renewal permit application as well. And when we review those renewal applications, we look at the history, whether they've had citations, whether there's violations, complaints. And so a little bit more than complaints, but whether we've issued violations, and we'll talk a little bit later in terms of our 3 strikes rule. So the processing time generally is approximately 30 days if there are no corrections, and 60+ days if there are corrections that are necessary. If we do deny a permit, then we do provide a written notice, and that permit denial can be appealed. Anything else, Jason, you want to add on that?
I just want to add, during this application process, operators aren't allowed to rent their property. So we see that now where, we find the unlicensed operators, they get cited, they come into the process to get a permit, and they continue to operate the entire time. With this new ordinance, they're not allowed to operate. They have to get their permit first. When we look at the permit and during the application process, we can go back in and calculate if they owe us any TOT for the past 3 years. So if they operated illegally for a year or 2, we can go back and try to determine if they owe the city any money for that time they were operating without a permit.
And as I mentioned, the permit is non-transferable, and we've included language here that the permit or the renewal permit does not give the owner any vested property rights. It doesn't run with the land to which it applies.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, sir.
Hate this darn thing. Who decides the appeal? I mean, who do they appeal to?
Right now, we have it an appeal to the city manager.
Okay.
And so I know we've had some discussion in terms of, how far that appeal goes. And I think that our perspective is that it either goes to the city manager or an administrative hearing officer that we use for other appeals, but that it not go to the council, and that the final review is somebody above our pay grade, and that's not us. So
Thank you.
The next, what we're going to talk about are the improved operational requirements. And so we're requiring, and we did this over COVID when we were adopting, our special orders with respect to rentals. One of the things that we started to institute then was a requirement that the rental contracts be submitted, just because of the way that the rules were with respect to the state under the COVID emergency. And so we're requiring the rental contracts be submitted to the city. We're also requiring that occupancy and parking information be displayed in advertisements, which we have done before as well. We made it a little bit more robust. The local contact person we've always had. However, we're requiring that local contact person live in the Coachella Valley. We provide a definition that's consistent with what our neighboring cities are doing as well. And then the posting of the short-term rental, what we call a notice, in the window of the property. So it's kind of just like a little cling, that we will provide, that we'll put together, because we're trying to make a lot of these things as easy as possible in terms of noticing labels, et cetera. So we'll provide this notice and they put it in the front of the window. And there are cities that do require that. And that way it makes it clear, that's a short-term rental, or at least it has a permit for a short-term rental. And then we have a check-in process that the owner or the agent has to be on site, or it could be done by video, that they advise what we call the responsible person. And the responsible person is defined as the person who actually rents the unit, has to be 25 years or older, of all the operational requirements and really the highlights, the noise, the trash, the occupancy. That the responsible person is given the local contact information person. I mean, that's really important, that they too know who is it that they can call with respect to any issues, and that they provide us with what we call the informational and acknowledgement forms. 2 different forms. Some of our neighboring cities do this. The informational form is to provide us those persons who are going to occupy the unit, who are going to sleep there overnight, with their names, the number of cars, and contact information. And the acknowledgement form is signed by the responsible person, and to acknowledge that they are responsible not only for themselves, but also their occupants and their guests. And that includes following all the rules with respect to noise and parking and trash and all of those items that affect neighborhoods. Jason? Anything to add on that part?
Yeah, Roxanne?
Yes, sir.
Would we be able to provide a pre-approved contract to residents for those who aren't, usually in the industry?
I would be hesitant to do that, only because, every contract is different with respect to like the rentals, and whether they do it by themselves or through an agency with VRBO. I mean, there are different, like percentages of who takes what in terms of it, insurance requirements. And so I think while we want to streamline it, I do think that that's one area that perhaps is not something that we should provide, but we can try to provide as much else as possible.
One thing for the check-in process, and the reason we're doing all this is we want the people that stay in our city to know what the rules are. So we see that time and time again when we're out at the property, we're out at that loud party, they don't know what the rules are. Or, they were told they can have loud music up until midnight or something like that. So we want to make it very clear up front that these are the rules that you must abide by when you stay in our city.
So what we call the improved operational requirements. So we have included noise standards, or I should say noise, maybe prohibition, some would look at it, but really a little bit more teeth in terms of what the noise limitations are, other than just saying you have to comply with our code. And I feel that when we were drafting this, from a regulatory perspective, even though, let's say, the code looks at noise from a reasonable person standard, this is different. This is a business, granted in the sense of, through your home, it's a different kind of residential use of property that one comes in to get a permit. And therefore, I think we're comfortable in adding different rules for that use, because the rules are different with respect to somebody who owns their own home in terms of noise, in terms of time limits. And so the first restriction is on amplified sound. And this would be the radio, the musical instruments, your loudspeaker, karaoke machine, even your cellular phone, anything that produces a sound that's audible outside, that is audible, cannot be heard during the hours of 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. Friday through Saturday. So this means that you can't, and this is for outside, you can't have your phone with the music blaring out at 11 o'clock at night. You can't, have any kind of, you can't do karaoke outside, during those I guess, quiet hours. And for the inside noise, in terms of amplified sound, any machine or a device that amplifies any type of sound inside of the rental can't be heard beyond the property line of the short-term rentals during the day and night. And that's for inside noise. And that's consistent, pretty consistent with our ordinance now for the population. The next one, and I'll answer questions after I explain what the difference is with the next item, is restrictions on what I call outside amenities that create noise. And so there are properties that have quiet hours. And so we've just defined what that is. And that is occupants of a short-term rental are prohibited from using any outdoor amenities or engaging in outdoor games or outdoor activities that create noise between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. Friday and Saturday. And that the operator of the short-term rental needs to have a sign stating that with that, making clear of these restrictions, they need to be posted like by the pool and the spa and any interior doors leading to the exterior amenities. You know, you might have that big, I don't know, not chess game that's outside, or I don't know, lawn bowling, cornhole, all of those things, you know, including, you know, just our noise in general makes noise at night. And so that's what we looked at, these two operational requirements in terms of noise. So any questions?
I kind of get it and I don't. I understand the opportunities for people to be living in their homes and not have to have this kind of noise on a continual basis. But, you know, it just seems overkill, because when you're talking about outside, what happens if they have a bouncy house and they're making noise and the kids are coming down? I mean, you got to shut it off at a certain time. You know what I'm saying? Does that do for our residents too? So if somebody has a short-term rental and they're there and they're sitting there at 9 o'clock, we have a resident next door that does it only once. It gives him the right or her the right to do that to whoever. Maybe these people have come down to enjoy themselves too. And all of a sudden they're looking on their list that says, you know, nothing after 10 o'clock, and the house next to them has all this noise. Are we going to go out to a resident's home and then talk to them about noise ordinance also?
We would certainly, if we get a complaint, and this would be, you know, complaint driven. And certainly if I owned a home and I had a bouncy house at 11 o'clock at night and I had a bunch of adults in the bouncy house and it was loud and raucous, then yes, police would go out there. And the same thing with the short-term rental. The difference is that the short-term rental has a hard time with the homeowner in his own house. It's our reasonable standard requirement, which is, you know, if it disturbs, if it disturbs another person, you know, if it reasonably disturbs another person that, you know, has reasonable hearing capabilities, you know, X. So yes, the rules are different. And we will enforce both noise complaints, but we would enforce them differently, because the presumption is that, you know, the presumption is that the short-term rental will likely have not maybe a family of 4 in a smaller house. It might have 10 or 12, I don't know. And so it's just, you know, but again, this is all for your consideration and for your discussion as well.
And so I look at that and I'm trying to grasp all this because, you know, I mean, the idea behind having a short-term rental and people come out here so they can spend time. Yes, there are bad apples and everything. Yes. But the problem that you have with this is, how do you justify it or how do you verify that? Because when you have a place like, let's use Montage, where our past city manager lived, 152 of the 171 are short-term rentals. The chance of those people complaining about anything is minute to none. You give these people an advantage over the other ones. Or if you have a neighbor next to you that just doesn't like you for whatever reason, maybe you don't get along with them. And maybe you rent your house out part-time. A lot of people do leave the desert because of the heat or whatever, and they want to get out. You know, all they have to do is that person call up 2 or 3 times. And just because they call up, I mean, unless we verify it, who verifies it, you know, I mean, I want to make sure it's fair to everyone, considering short-term rentals is a very big part of our concerts. And I understand why the other cities have done it. But the city of festivals and the $3 million we get from short-term rentals is a lot of money. And I keep telling people that we can't have the concerts without the short-term rentals. There's just not. And if hotels start to back out, there won't be any concerts. So, you know, the more we put on there, and I understand it's hard to police, But, you know, I want to be fair, make sure that we don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg by making it so restrictive to our stuff that, you know, eventually the concerts or someone else goes somewhere else like Vegas where they can have 500,000 hotel rooms and they don't need to worry about anybody other than a few things. So that's just that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Go ahead.
There's a question in regards to the same comments. Mr. Anderson, on a regular nuisance and noise complaint, do we have a set time for our city or is it just on complaint basis? And also would this play into the 3 strikes? I know you haven't got there yet, but would this play into it? So I understand the concern, but I've witnessed some of these things, folks, having DJs until 12 o'clock. And if you work shift work, you got to be up at a certain hour. That I can see the concern there, but what's the difference there?
So the difference is, to answer your question, we don't have a hard and fast rule, a time. We have the reasonable person standard. So if we get a complaint at any time and a police officer, a code enforcement, an agent of the government shows up and the noise is unreasonable it's the unreasonable person standard. So if the noise is such as it's unreasonable, if you're the homeowner, we have a loud party response ordinance. So we give you a notice and that notice is good for up to 90 days. So there's an assumption there that you're the homeowner, you're going to abide with a warning for the 90 days. The difference on a short-term rental is that 90-day period is for the weekend. So we can't tell you and tell the next person that it's on restriction for 90 days. So we need something to actually deal with the operation of the business. Homeowners are different because homeowners, we can have that conversation, we can put them on notice, and if there's a continued violation for up to a 90-day period, we can respond and issue citations, and we have a protocol for that. For short-term rentals, we don't have that opportunity to have that conversation initially and have it last for that 90-day period.
And I think also it will go into the modernization of the process, because if you're responding to this, and Ian, I hope you're listening back there, if you're responding to this, I mean, how would you know that they've been warned, or, there's got to be some sort of documentation or tracking mechanism to where you can say, okay, this is the second time we've been out this weekend. We need to really have a deep conversation with,
Yeah.
So I think this also plays into the importance of revamping our system.
Yeah, you're right.
And so a couple of questions. I totally agree. We need our short-term rentals. We absolutely do. But we also need a balance of a quality of life. This isn't sort of a, every now and then kind of thing. For people that live next to a short-term rental, there could be crazy people there every single weekend screaming as they dive in the pool at 11 o'clock at night. And so our ability to manage that is important. What do hotels? I mean, if I'm staying at a hotel, I don't care whether it's a Motel 6 or a Hyatt Regency, how does this compare with some of the noise standards?
Not that I've ever been kicked out of a hotel, but they do have noise standards. I mean, if you're a guest that is creating an abundant amount of noise, hotels have their own, most, not all, have their own private security, and that they will investigate. I know some high-end hotels will escort people out. And so, and again, it raises to the level of, beyond just common decency. I mean, it just raises to the level of just, it's exorbitant and it's continued. And, they give a warning. It's like, can you turn it down? We got a complaint. Can you turn it down? We got a complaint. And then it becomes a more, escalated type of thing. And that's only my experience in working with a city that had a number of luxury hotels, that I can say that, because I know that's the way they've handled it. And we've had police that were called out to those hotels to deal with those types of issues with hotel guests.
I'm thinking the last time usually pool closed at 10 o'clock.
That's
or
right.
Something like that. There's some.
And I've
period.
stayed at a short-term rental area outside of the state. And I remember we're sitting having dinner and they said, oh, it's 10 o'clock. It's the quiet hours. Like, we have to be quiet. And it's just, you can't, they don't, tolerate that noise.
Because I think the short-term rentals ought to sort of not be any more severe than if you were staying in a hotel. That's just, which is what it appears we're striving for. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just one other question. So when there's a complaint, take this damn thing off. When there's a complaint, is it based on the officer hearing it, or just somebody call up and said they're too loud. So if you show up, there is no noise. There is no abundance of things. That's not a warning. That's not a thing, because you just can't have somebody call up. You've got to actually hear it, right?
Yeah, so an officer has to witness the violation.
So
for
if
it
they
to be a
come-
violation.
So if they show up and say there's kids jumping in the pool at 10 o'clock, and it's, you can hear, but it's a basic thing. You're not going to you're going to come in and tell them that there's been a complaint made and this and that. You're going to look around, hear anything, maybe sit there for a few seconds. If you don't hear anything, turn around and go away. But that's not a violation.
It's not a violation.
You literally have to. So we just don't have somebody calling up and saying, "Oh, this is what it is," and you guys go over there.
Yeah.
And,
Yep, here we
and
go.
also, I mean, that's why we have the local contact person, because if we get something like that, it's, we will have that local contact person, depending on the complaint. They need to make a communication, a contact with the responsible person to let them know that the city is receiving complaints about noise. And it's incumbent on, frankly, the owner of running a good, operation to have that local contact person that we will contact and say, look, there's a noise complaint, keep it down. Or if it's something egregious, then we can require that person to go out, and they have the right as the owner's agent without a warrant to enter into that property, for whatever reason.
Because I remember when we had one of the short-term rentals had quite a few, Spencer Wumple, and he had, has quite a few in the country estates there, but he actually installed noise monitors that when it gets to a certain level, it automatically sends him a message saying that this level in different areas is gone. Might be something we want to look towards.
We actually built that into this ordinance, not as a requirement, but as something that if, depending on the level of complaints, I mean, we can do it either way. It's La Quinta that has, has pilot program with respect to two things, which are kind of both very interesting, is the noise monitor that you're talking about. And so therefore it's incumbent on the owner to kind of take that action. And also there's a mechanism where it gets installed in the house that it'll tell you how many cell phone lines are in the house. So if there's 100 cell phone, I don't know what, I mean, you probably know because you're a police officer, what the 100 cell phone, lines are there. And then that signals to the owner, I got a problem because there's probably in all likelihood a great number of people at that house. And so in here, I can't forget where, but we've built in not as a requirement, because I think, as staff, we need to further explore that, speak to our neighbors in La Quinta and kind of learn from them as well and what they've been experiencing. But if we need to, as a condition, a further condition in terms of pulling the permit, bringing in the permit for either a revocation or a modification based on, a history and based on complaints that we have verifiable items, and then making that modification.
So would something like that be like, say you're due for some sort of inspection and we review the application and say, hey, you know what, you have frequent complaints of your noise. This is something you might want to,
Yeah, and it would be either if we have to, if it's so bad that we have to bring in the permit for a suspension hearing or a modification hearing or revocation hearing, then that might be one way to cure the issue. Because I think, the owner as well, I mean, they're probably great owners that just don't know what's going on. And so you don't want to punish everybody for the few bad apples that we have. And, we had, great discussions among staff on how to reach that balance and how to figure out to promote good behavior and punish the bad behavior. So that's things that, we were kind of struggling with internally. Okay, so I'll go to the next slide if they can pull that up. Oh, okay, I guess it's not, I'm looking at the wrong, there it is. Okay, so if all you can see it, that's great. So the next big thing is occupancy. And so we had, some discussion when we were here the last time with respect to it. Our current occupancy level is overnight only, and it's 2 per bedroom plus 2 additional people. And it can be increased through a request of building and safety and a further inspection with respect to increasing the number of persons that can stay based on the configuration of the home. And what we are proposing is right off the bat, everyone gets 4. A 4-person occupancy, and it would be then plus 2 for each bedroom. And maybe I'll do the next slide because it's a little bit easier to see. Sorry, Jason, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, so what we're proposing is right off the bat, you get 4, and then for every bedroom, you get 2 more, up to a max of 8 bedrooms. So you max out at 20. Once you max out, and this is an overnight only for a daytime, for more than 20 people, we came up with the number of 25. If you have a gathering of 25 persons, whether it's during the day or the evening, that you would have to come in for what we're calling right now a special event permit, for lack of a different term at the moment. And that would be to address the large gatherings or homes that are being used for special events. And so, we had a lot of discussion with respect to this in terms of trying to find what the sweet spot is, but also trying to recognize that we have large homes in the city, and we may have a large home that's 3 bedrooms, where certainly you have a den that has a pull-out couch, or you have a living room that may have a pull-out couch, and so it's a balance. In terms of where some of the other cities are, Palm Springs caps out at 4 bedrooms with 8 overnight as their max. We're at 12, but then they have a concept where then they determine that any home that has 5 bedrooms or more is an estate, and then you're required to get a special permit for the use of that estate. And so an estate permit, a special event permit. Rancho Mirage, this is very similar to Rancho Mirage. They cap out at 7 or more bedrooms at overnight for 14. And they do require the daytime, they do require a special permit at 20 for more than 25 people, requiring a special event permit. And then La Quinta caps out at 9 bedrooms with 18 overnight. And for the daytime, it's 18 to 24. And then Cathedral City caps out at 5 bedrooms with a maximum of 10 occupants. So it's a little all over the board. I can't sit here and tell you that there's a real science to it. It's just I think we were trying to balance some of the things that we heard at the last meeting, which was, we want to encourage the lacrosse team to come and have a gathering, or somebody who has a large family to have Thanksgiving, where they all decided to come to the desert and have Thanksgiving. We wanted to provide a little bit more certainty in the process in terms of not having to have staff go out and figure out, okay, how many can you really fit? And then changing the maximum occupancy based on the configuration of the home. And so that's why we decided to give 4 up front, because it does, increase the numbers. And it seems that they were given more, like maybe 2 or 4, or, somewhere in that range of more occupancy. And we tried to balance the consistency of it. Some cities have daytime occupancy that's hard to regulate. The overnight is a little bit easier. We also try to balance and how to address those homes that we know that may have a short-term rental permit, but at the same time, they're being used for events. What we don't want is for that type of use to use the guise of a short-term rental permit to be able to have a wedding. If you're going to have a wedding or a large gathering, then you need to come in for a special event permit, even if that means it's every week, if that's your business. But at that point in time, then I think, in talking to planning, then we need to look at whether really we need to clarify the zoning for those types of uses. If it's a large estate home where it's an area where there's very large estate homes. And so I think we were trying to look at a bunch of different things and coming up with this. And I don't know if you want to add anything else, or anybody else here on the team wants to add anything.
Yeah, I just want to add that when we looked at this, we looked at what are the effects. So what are the effects to the community when there are large gathering? So it's loud noise, it's parking issues, and we're going to talk about parking in a minute. That goes into the calculation as well. So we're looking at what is the effect and being reasonable to the operators. So we're trying to stop the bad actors, stop the effects on the community, and balance that with the operators.
And maybe before I get questions from you, we talk about the parking real quick.
I think that's the next slide.
Yeah, it is the next slide.
No.
And so that way you know how parking plays into it. So there isn't any current parking limits or restrictions. And so what we're proposing as part of this parking plan is not necessarily like some cities will do. They'll look at, you have to have a parking space for every, I don't know, what square footage of the house, or, they manage parking in a variety of different ways. And so looking at a bunch of different types of ordinances from different cities in terms of providing parking, and realizing that you may not have parking on site as well. So we looked at that as a limitation, and instead we kind of churned the parking around and said, look, parking on site is going to be measured by the number, your maximum number of vehicles that you can have for that rental is going to be measured by how many parking spaces can you fit legally on site. That's your driveway, your parking garage, just like any other homeowner. That's not the front yard, that's not the apron, it's legal parking on site, per the zoning code. So that would be your driveway, your garage. And so, and if you have 4 spaces, even if your house allows for 12, you have 4 spaces, and that's it. And we provided an allowance that you could have one of those 4 spaces could be on the street if wherever you're at allows parking on the street and has to be in front of the home. Or alternatively, the way we looked at parking is, 1 vehicle per bedroom, but only, so if you had 3 bedrooms, you have to have your max vehicles is 3. But again, if you had a house that has 8 bedrooms, but you can legally only put 4 parking spaces, you're maxed out at the lesser, you're maxed out at 4. So that's how we looked at parking vis-a-vis the occupancy, where just because you have, let's say, a house that it has 5 bedrooms, if it happens to be a house that's 5 bedrooms with no parking, then you're kind of out of luck on the parking side. And that's what causes the impacts, because those people then flow into the streets and people get upset. And so we want to contain the impacts on site. And so that's the way we tackled it. And, we're happy to answer questions, hear thoughts. And you could tell us what you're thinking.
Please.
So let me get this right. So if they have 12 parking spaces, they're limited to 4 anyways?
Well,
And what happens, you're allowed 25 people. 25 people aren't going to come in 4 cars.
well, and that's why we're here to kind of talk about it. I mean, I think, some of us felt very strongly about, you have a big house, you have lots of parking, then you can utilize those spaces. And I think in some respect that makes sense. If it's a large, looking at a house that has 12 parking spaces on site is probably going to be a very large lot. And so if we want to look at it that way, then certainly we can write it that way, that you're maxed out at how many cars you have on site. And that would be both for your overnight people, the people that are staying there, but also your guests as well. But again, we're open to any discussion and looking at this differently.
Yeah, no, I continue to look at it as if, like my neighbors,
Mhm.
So, I mean, if they have a family gathering of 15 people, you know, they're parked up and down the whole car. You have a family gathering, your birthday or something, it's up and down. It's not every day. So I understand the impacts, the double part of it. I just think it's very gonna be difficult to be able to police and whose car is what, or is the public safety going to go in and say, is this your car? Is this your car? Is this your car? Eventually, you know, you infringe upon other people's rights to, you know, as you start to continue to go through. But I can see it part way. I just don't understand, especially now with how is the new laws coming in by the state of California, where you can have a casita, you can sell the stuff, you can park wherever you want. It doesn't matter if your HOA says you can't park on the street unless you can provide parking. How does that affect other stuff?
So there are provisions consistent with what we've done before, is that if you live in a, although casita we had not addressed before, but if you have an ADU, a junior ADU, a casita, all of those, you would be prohibited from using those as short-term rentals. And if you live in an apartment house, you're prohibited from using that as a short-term rental. If you're a lessee, let's say there's a duplex, and you decide that, you know, and you rent that, you know, you rent one of the houses on the lot, you're prohibited from having a short-term rental. This is something that it's owner-driven, it's not renter-driven. And we're trying to respect to the fact that, you know, casitas, ADUs, and JADUs are meant to provide affordable housing as well. And so, you know, we're trying to balance that. I do think you do have a point with respect to maybe it's not the lesser, you know, and it's if you have enough space for all of those cars, and that's the max number of spaces for your rental for that weekend. You know, it's highly unlikely that, you know, maybe it's just 2 families and it's probably going to be 2 or 3 cars, not 12, but they want enough space to have those 2 families. But I think for us is we were trying to figure out ways to keep them off the streets. And I did build into there, it's not a parking violation. It would be a violation of the ordinance that would be issued against the renter, is that if he has any of his guests or occupants, which are guests, overnight or otherwise, if they park somewhere on the street and not on the property, then they get a citation. And it's not a parking citation, it's a citation because you're violating the rules of the ordinance. And so again, how we figure that out, I mean, we're going to ask for license plate numbers, so that way, you know, we can see if the license plate number matches the sheet. I know that not, you know, I know in every situation, you're not going to have truthful actors. And so, but I think that at least we're trying to manage it rather than not address it.
I just, I'll end with this. I think the only part that's going to be difficult, the cars, if you can have 10, 12 parking spots, you should be able to use all your parking spots. You shouldn't be able to limit
That's
somebody
fine.
else's property. That's their property.
That's fine.
So, and then the second part of it is if you have 25 people, there's absolutely no way you're going to get them to do cars. I mean, you're having people come and they're staying at other places and they're going to go to a house. To say unrealistically that they're not going to bring 15 cars, 12 cars is being unrealistic. It's just unrealistic.
I don't dispense that. I mean, I recognize that there are difficulties, you know, with enforcement, but I think that, you know, again, it will all play into the renewal process in terms of complaints or where it becomes difficult. I mean, you know, if you have a renter that is a good, you know, that is mindful of the neighborhood in terms of cars and it's discreet, I mean, no one's going to notice because they're not causing problems. And this really comes into, you know, those that are causing problems and, you know, the parties and the different things. And that's why we try to, you know, figure out that number. And, you know, we look at various ordinances, and the Rancho Mirage, you know, kind of default of 25 is that if you're going to have a gathering of 25 or more, you know, we'll make it easy. It's just a simple, you know, type of permit so that we know and that we can condition if we need to. But for the family Thanksgiving, it's recognizing that, okay, you know, this is the way that'll work. But if it's a corporation that wants to throw, you know, and give away stuff and charge admission, then that's not permitted. However, we're building in this kind of special permit process to recognize that there are some houses that are more venue oriented, and they're in situated so that maybe there is not a lot of impact, or we can require valet, or we can require offsite parking with shuttles. There are different ways to manage it. It's trying to have us get in front of the issue rather than react to the issue that night.
And on that note, I mean, I think there's lots more conversation. I think we need to have more conversation. Can we continue this to a study session the first week of October? Because I know we've got to do the closed session. Would that be, how does everybody feel about that? Everybody good?
Mayor, I
Okay.
never got a chance to ask any questions.
And Councilmember Amit, please do. Everybody's sort of jumping in, so please go right ahead.
Well, I mean, at this point, we're over the time limit,
Oh,
so
but that's okay, you get 5 or 10 more minutes, isn't we, our closed session isn't that extensive, so please weigh in.
I don't feel this ordinance is ready to move. I think we still need to have a lot of discussion.
Sure.
I'm hesitant on the parking issue. Number one, property owners don't have control of public streets parking. So to require them to utilize a parking space that's immediately adjacent to their property is kind of unreasonable. If I have 25 family members come over for Thanksgiving at my house, they're certainly not going to all give me their driver's license, their license plate number. So the whole parking issue, I understand that we're trying to minimize the impact on the overflow on the streets, but they're public streets, and I don't think it's right for us to try to regulate what is available to the general public. So I'm leaning towards omitting entirely the parking section that I don't think there's any way that we can regulate that. That's just my position at this time. I want to go back to no commercial activities. The owner shall use reasonably prudent practices. Large parties are prohibited unless they have a special events permit. Okay, and I too take issue with subsection 37015B, that we, the short-term rentals may not be rented to any corporation, LLC, commercial company, or similar entity, that it has to be a human being. That's not right either. We certainly have long-term rentals that we rent to corporations and businesses. Why are we restricting short-term rentals to not rent to businesses? They would just have to have a responsible party for us to interact with. So I stand against that item B. And subsection 37014, section D, I don't think that we can control the ancillary services that any platform can be collecting a fee for, directly or indirectly. All of the platforms also sell experiences with their short-term rental stays. So for us to try to enforce a practice on a private enterprise is out of the scope of what the city has the ability to do. And in several other sections, when the ordinance refers to a responsible person, I just want to correct that to read a responsible representative, because in the case of a company or an agency or a property management company, it's going to be a representative. The age of 25 to rent, I think I'd like to lower that to 21. 21 is a responsible age. You can join the Army at 18. I think you can buy a gun at 18. But we can't short-term rent to someone until they're 25 is a little too restrictive. Those are just my general comments at first glance. I really didn't have a chance to ask questions as the PowerPoint presentation was moving forward. So I think we need to have another study session on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. So we'll sort of continue this to the next meeting.
Can I just have one more? I did want to mention something that we haven't discussed, so that's outside of the enforcement issues, right? So when we talk to some of the real estate agents out here, they're saying more and more of their properties, there's very few properties on the market, right? And more of them are getting bought out by corporations that are looking to do short-term rentals. And they're outbidding our residents who are looking for homes. And so how do we mitigate that during a housing crisis, right? So I think, if we separate those out, right, into which permits are resident owned and which permits are corporate owned, because I would like to limit stop for the moment in giving permits to corporate owned rentals that are going to be rented out throughout the whole year, so that our families still have homes to purchase, and then they can make the money off the short-term rentals during the festivals or a few weekends out of the year. But I do think we should differentiate between permits that are rented throughout the whole year and then permits that are rented for a few weekends by people who own the homes.
Okay, thank you. And on that note, I will end the closed session. I will end the study session and move into closed session. It's 10 minutes after 4. I'd like to call the meeting of the closed session to order, and may I have roll call, please?
Yes, for the record, all council members are present.
Thank you. Closed session, public comment. This is the time set aside for public comment on items not on the agenda. Do we have any public comments at this time?
None, Mayor.
Okay, we will adjourn to closed session to consider.
The items listed in the closed session agenda.
Simple.